Hello, welcome to the final section of this course. In this section, we will create a game manager that will control the entire flow of the game. In particular, we will learn how to exchange information from the game manager to other elements, such as indicating the enemy's way to go, or decreasing the number of lives that the player has when the enemies have reached the end of their path. Now we move on to the first video of this section, Getting Ready and Waypoints for Enemies. In this video, you will handle remaining logic within a single script. We will start by creating a game object, finalize the positions of placing waypoints, then proceed to create waypoints and finally add them in Game Manager. During this section, we are going to handle most of the logic remaining within a single script. Let's start by creating a game object to hold it. Right-click on the Hierarchy panel and then click on Create Empty. Rename it Game Manager. This name is important because we will be using it to find this game object in other scripts. Next, click on Add Component, New Script, and call it Game Manager Script. As a result, we are ready to implement the finishing touches to our game. Now the first thing to finish is how the enemies move around the map. In Section 7, Tower Defense Basics, we saw how to script them in order to make them move from one waypoint to another. As a short recap, a waypoint is a special point on the map where the enemies change their direction to move towards another waypoint. They can contain logic to actually lead the character to specific places that change over time, such as next to the player. They can also perform part of the decision-making process. For example, imagine a tower defense game where the path of the enemies splits in two. In this case, the waypoints can be used to decide which direction a particular enemy should take. The advantage of waypoints is that in some cases they can be more efficient than implementing a complete pathfinding algorithm. Here, we don't need to implement a particular logic behind the waypoints. However, they are useful tools, since they allow us to move enemies around the map easily. In this section, we will learn how to create waypoints. Before we start creating waypoints, we first need to decide where to place them on the map. Therefore, we need to find all the places where our enemies change their direction. In this simple case, they are located in all the corners of our path. In the following screenshot, they are indicated by the red dots. As we can see, there are 9 dots and we need one waypoint that is slightly outside the map. This final waypoint is the finishing spot, where the enemy succeeds in his mission, to damage the player. In fact, in the enemy script, when the enemy reaches the end, we just destroy it. For this reason, this spot must be outside the visible area. Now that we have marked them with red dots, we need to take note of their coordinates on the map. A fast way to do it is to drag an enemy prefab around the map in the scene view, and then take note of the position of our waypoints. In this case, we could obtain this data. The next step is to actually add them into our game manager. Therefore, let's start by opening our game manager script, so that we can create a new transform array variable to insert those values. Of course, we need to set this variable to public, so we can set the value in the inspector. Save the code and you should see something like this in the inspector. We need to set the number of elements of our array with the number of waypoints that we have found, in this case 9. Therefore, our inspector will now look like this. Finally, we can fill all those values with our waypoint positions. But what about the z-axis? Since we don't want the enemies to change their z-axis, we can just set its value to the same z-axis value of our enemy prefab, which is -1. Set the coordinates as this. In the end, we should have something like this. One last step to complete in order to fully integrate the waypoints into our game is to actually give them to the enemies. If you remember from Tower Defense Basics, we created a variable called Waypoints, but we never set its value. Also for this reason, we got so many errors if we tried to press the play button. Let's fix this by finally assigning this variable to our enemies. To begin, open the enemy script. Since the waypoints change with the map that we are playing, we don't want to set them all the time for each enemy. Therefore, we can get them from the Game Manager, which is specific for a particular level. The first thing to do is to get a reference to it. We can do this by adding this variable type, Game Manager from Game Manager script. Then in the start function, we can get a reference to it by using the find and the get component functions together. Now we can finally get all the waypoints by copying the array on the Game Manager into the local variables of the enemy by using this line. Let's save our scripts so that we can finish dealing with the waypoints. Splendid! In this video, you learned how to create waypoints for enemies.